Cannabis Common Sense, the show that tells the truth about marijuana and the politics behind its prohibition.
Hello and welcome to another exciting edition of Cannabis Common Sense. We have another great show for you tonight. We have Mr. Chris Conrad from his home down in the Bay Area of California. Chris is the author of 8 books on cannabis and a longtime activist, longtime friend of mine, and I'm happy to have him back on the show. Before that, we have a short but sweet hemp news segment, and as always, let's start off with our infamous dancing cannabis leaves.
I feel the force.
Okay, out of Washington, D.C., as Senate leaders work to draft a bill to federally legalize marijuana, there's an elephant in the room. With Democrats in control of the chamber, the votes might not be there to enact comprehensive reform. Recognizing the potential challenges of mustering 60 votes to overcome a filibuster for standalone legislation on the floor, advocates are urging leadership to pursue the policy change through a process known as budget reconciliation. That would require a simple majority of 51 votes for a broader must-pass package. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, who's spearheading the legalization push in his chamber, didn't rule out that possibility at a press conference last week. Asked whether senators might try to incorporate the cannabis proposal into reconciliation, he said, quote, "You'll hear in a few weeks the legislation that'll answer that question," end quote. Of course, back on April 20th, Senate Majority Leader Schumer did tweet, "Happy 420, legalization's coming soon." Our next story is from Montana. Members of the Montana House and Senate approved legislation to amend the state's voter-approved adult-use marijuana legalization law earlier this week, sending the measure to Republican Governor Greg Gainforth's desk. The Montana House approved House Bill 701 Tuesday by a 67 to 32 vote after initially rejecting the measure a day earlier following contentious debate. The measure decreases the personal cultivation limit from 4 mature plants per adult and 8 mature plants per household, as originally approved by voters last November, to 2 mature plants per adult and 4 mature plants per household. Under HB 701, medical cannabis patients may still cultivate up to 4 mature plants per patient. On Election Day 2020, almost 60% of Montana voters decided in favor of 2 initiatives, I-190 and Initiative 118. A pair of complementary citizens-initiated ballot measures legalizing the personal possession, commercial production, and retail sale of marijuana to adults. These measures already went into effect back at the 1st of January. For Michigan, the history of cannabis use is not negatively associated with survival rates among patients receiving liver transplants, according to data published in the Journal of Clinical Transplantation. A team of researchers affiliated with University of Michigan at Ann Arbor reviewed data on post-liver transplantation outcomes in a cohort of 2,690 subjects. They concluded, quote, post-liver transplantation survival was not impacted by self-reported marijuana use history, end quote. Their findings are consistent with several other studies concluding that marijuana use is not contraindicated in patients receiving organ transplants. Nonetheless, in several states, including here in Oregon, states that permit medical cannabis access, those with a history of marijuana use are ineligible to receive organ transplants. I personally know more than 100 people who died because they've been denied organ transplants because of medical marijuana. The full text of this study, Marijuana Use Among Adult Liver Transplant Candidates and Recipients, appears in this month's edition of the Clinical Transplantation. In the South, the Florida Supreme Court's dealt a critical blow to marijuana activists working to legalize marijuana in Florida killing an initiative that hundreds of thousands of voters have already signed and forcing them to start all over again if they want to make the 2022 ballot. In a 5-2 ruling on Thursday, the court determined that the Make It Legal Florida Reform Initiative is unconstitutional, arguing that the ballot summary is affirmatively misleading because it says adult use cannabis would be made lawful in the state without explicitly acknowledging that it would remain illegal under federal law. This means advocates could have to start over from drafting the measure to collecting signatures if they hope to make next year's ballot. The group's already collected over 500,000 signatures, over 556,000 valid signatures for the now invalidated constitutional amendment. They needed 891,589 voter signatures to place the initiative before Florida's voters. Then at least 60% of the voters would have had to approve it on the ballot for it to pass. The court took up a legal review of the initiative at the request of the state attorney general, Ashley Moody's office, which then submitted a brief in opposition to the legalization petition. An issue the majority justices said in their ruling is the use of the word permits in the ballot summary when referring to activities such as possessing and purchasing marijuana by adults 21 and older. Because the initiative fails to acknowledge that such activity would not be permissible under federal law, they deemed the summary misleading and therefore unconstitutional. But in a dissenting opinion, two justices argued that essentially self-evident that the measure would only apply to Florida law and not change federal statutes prohibiting marijuana. The two justices wrote, quote, "Today's decision underestimates Florida voters and adds hurdles to the citizen initiative process that are not supported by the plain language of the governing law or our precedent," end quote. The Florida campaign had intended to get legalization on the ballot in 2020, but activists announced early that year that they were shifting focus to 2022 due to the restrictive signature requirements around the COVID pandemic. If the measure hadn't been killed by the courts and ultimately qualified and was approved by voters, it would have allowed adults 21 and older to possess, use, transport, and purchase up to 2.5 ounces of cannabis. Existing medical cannabis dispensaries would have been able to sell recreational marijuana. Recent polling shows that a majority of voters, 59%, support legalizing cannabis for adult use. Our last story tonight is from Washington, D.C. The U.S. Department of Agriculture is teaming up with a chemical manufacturing company on a 2-year project that could significantly expand the hemp-based cosmetic market. The goal is to take an innovative approach to hemp processing to create cosmeceuticals, or ingredients that perform specific functions, like protecting skin from UV light, retaining moisture, or stabilizing other active ingredients used in skincare formulations. USDA's Agricultural Research Service announced on Tuesday that it will be working with the Illinois-based Midwest Bioprocessing Center, or MBC, to apply the process known as biocatalysts to hemp seed oil. Instead of relying on, quote, harsh chemicals and solvents, unquote, to bind antioxidants to fats and products like vegetable oil, biocatalysis involves using enzymes and heat to facilitate that binding. The agency also noted that beyond cosmetics and personal care markets, its researchers are also looking into ways to, quote, better process hemp into fuels, lubricants, and adhesives, as well as functional food ingredients and fiber products, end quote. USDA also recently announced that it's seeking permission to collect additional data on hemp production from tens of thousands of farmers and ranchers. Last year, the USDA announced plans to distribute a separate national survey to gain insight from thousands of hemp businesses that could inform its approach to regulating the industry. It's about time. That's the end of our hemp news segment tonight. If you or a loved one are looking for a physician or doctor that can help you obtain a medical marijuana permit anywhere in the country, from Florida to Hawaii, give us a call. Our number is 503-235-4606. That's 503-235-4606. Next up, we have a great interview with our longtime friend, Mr. Chris Conrad. Thank you, and help restore hemp. Well, I'd like to welcome Chris Conrad back to our show. It's been more than a year and a half since you were in town. We had you on the show. Welcome back, Chris.
Pleasure to be here, Paul.
Yeah, Chris, name all the books that you are out there. And I know you started with Hemp Lifeline to the Future. That was your first book, right?
Right. Although I designed and edited Jack Harris book, The Emperor Wears No Clothes, and so I actually did a lot of that book as my work as well. But nonetheless, Hemp Lifeline of the Future was a book I wrote in 1993 that clarified that. Well, by basically what I did at the beginning is I explained the environmental crisis and talked about how hemp could be used to do that in specific products that can be made from it and business opportunities that could be had by developing it. And you were actually onto hemp before I was, but I had never heard of that until I jumped onto it in '88. But Hemp Lifeline of the Future was that first book. Then the second one was called Hemp for Health. That was medical marijuana and hemp seed nutrition that we covered in that book. And the fun thing about that was that it was I brought up a couple of things that wound up being controversial at the time, and yet have worked out to be pretty accurate in the long term. Like, for example, I wrote about using CBD from hemp as a way of getting therapeutic benefit from it and also helping the industry survive. I also wrote about using cannabis in a Ayurvedic method, using, in other words, where you take advantage of the psychotropic effects in order to help enhance. And also, I talked about the homeopathic use of it, which is at the time I was saying, well, that's not real medicine, da da da. But now we call it microdosing, and it's become quite accepted. And actually, it was in the 19th century, homeopathy was one of the main kinds of medicine that was out there. And then after that, I wrote a book with my wife, Mickey Norris, and our friend Virginia Resident that was called Shattered Lives, Portraits from America's Drug War. And that one, Paul, what we did was we basically took stories of people whose lives were destroyed by the drug war. And then we explained how the structure of the laws was responsible for that and the history of how those laws came into play. And then we did another bit of a spin-off of that, which was called Human Rights in the U.S. Drug War. And it approached it from the opposite. It said, here's what the international human rights laws here say. Here's what the Constitution, the Bill of Rights say. Here's what the drug laws do. Here are these people whose lives were destroyed by it. So it approaches the same information from a different angle. And then after that, I did a book that's called Cannabis Yields and Dosage, which I took the federal study on cannabis yields from 1992 and compared it with other things and developed it into a formula. Also with the federal investigational new drug programs, dosages of marijuana. And I used that to create a formula that was quite effective because by that point I was an expert witness in the courts. And then the last book I have here is called The Newbie's Guide to Cannabis and the Industry. And it's kind of like a revisiting of some of the things that we had in Hemp Lifeline of the Future, but with less of an environmental and more of a business approach towards looking at the information.
So how many books is that now? 10?
Somewhere around 7. There's actually my little orphan book, which was called Nostradamus and the Attack on New York, where I, after the 9/11 attacks, I looked at the writings of the 15th century mystic Nostradamus. And but that's a completely different topic than all the other books.
It counts. It counts.
Yeah. Actually, the other thing was that I thought the book was going to be debunking Nostradamus, but in fact, like for example, when I read the information there was a set of 4 verses that said that the eagle goes into Babylon, and so I said, well, that would mean, from a modern perspective, that would be the United States really attacking Iraq. And I said, look, 9/11, we've got Saudi Arabians working out of Afghanistan, attacking New York. Iraq has absolutely nothing to do with it. I said, he's got to be wrong about that. That one can't be right. And as we know, we ended up in Iraq 2 years later.
Yeah. There was some odd things there, that's for certain.
Yeah. And, I think it'd be a good thing to mention, though, really, at this point, is that what Mickey and I have been up to in the recent years is that since legalization, I'm not doing as much time as an expert witness in the courts because, fortunately, there are not as many court cases that I have to deal with.
Wait, I know you've got a case tomorrow you're going to be working with in the morning.
I
So,
also have one Friday, so yeah, it's not completely gone. But these are like the first two in 2 years, you know.
oh, okay. Well, that puts it in perspective.
Yeah, right, exactly. But
The COVID shutdown, everything's been put on hold. I know you were going to do a speaking gig down in Guadalajara that got canceled last year, and
right, uh-huh. You know, another thing that we were hoping to do actually in 2020, one of our goals was we wanted to do a Return of the Bach tour. That was in 1991 when I drove around the country and met with activists. You were actually one of those activists.
for commerce and hemp, which was the first hemp business organization, basically, at least in generations.
Right, yeah. And as a result of forming that, I rather than forming a business, I decided to help other people form businesses and collected information about where supplies were from and so forth. And so you were one of the people who really took advantage of that. You know, and part of that actually, when I decided to become active in the cannabis movement, I was looking for an angle that hadn't been really played up. And I found that the idea of being able to make money was going to be important. And initially, I thought I was only talking about through the marijuana markets, but then once I figured out with hemp, I started putting together this information and identified a couple of sources of hemp products and encourage people to start businesses and so forth to get the businesses really back moving again in the States. Yeah. But when I met Jack Herer, one of the first things he said to me is like, I'm wearing this jacket that's made out of marijuana. That was 1990.
Okay.
And you probably saw that jacket. It was a pretty raggedy little jacket that he was wearing. But he says, my jacket is made out of marijuana and it's illegal. And I had to point out to him that it was not illegal. It was not marijuana. It was hemp. And it was legal under the customs and the import codes to bring that into the country. But it's funny because he hadn't made that connection or whatever. He thought it was a better talking point. So he had an illegal jacket. He thought it was a better talking point than follow the business codes and you can start a business.
I always had one word I thought described Jack the best, and it was bombastic. I always, from day one. But just last week, we had Paul von Hartmann on the show talking about his book about climate change and cannabis and terpenes. And he was saying he first found out about hemp while he was working on the Sea Shepherd campaign on the island of Maui. He was watching PBS, and there was the show, The 90s. And Johnny Hempseed there. I remember that. I thought that was 89, but I guess it must have been 1990.
Yeah.
But you had your tricorner hat on. You're on the roadside sowing hemp seeds
on the side of the road.
Yeah,
It was a lot of fun doing that.
pretty impressive at the time to see anything pro marijuana on television, or anywhere, because everything was so this bust and that bust and brain damage and these are eggs and this is your brain on a frying pan or something, So things have changed so much, for instance, on this show, I've been doing this show, it'll be 25 years in October. It used to be all of the news were different arrests or there was very little good news back in the late 90s. And today it's all just out, especially the past few weeks. It's been incredible. I mean, Chuck Schumer tweeted out happy 420 and legalization is coming soon last week,
Yeah, I guess I might hang on. What's his name? The West Virginia or Barbara. Dianne Feinstein. As to what it comes out looking like, which is really depressing.
Yes.
They don't have enough. Some Republicans should be willing to cross over, but there's no guarantee or even at this point probability that they would.
Well, I think the ones in states where cannabis is legal would, but
you mean if Schumer moves it to the floor, you think it's going to pass bipartisan? Yeah, I hope you're right.
That's the thing. There's so much to talk about politics right now. I heard that Schumer isn't going to let the Banking Act come up, and he's going to attach legalization to the general budget bill. So it's all rolled up in one, and it's if you want the budget, marijuana's legal. That's Schumer's latest idea that I read in I think in the New York Times.
Oh, well, I'll take it.
Anyway, yeah, if we can change the federal law, that would change everything. Of course, it
Hmm.
was a bipartisan bill for the Banking Act, but Schumer's idea is that if we do it piecemeal, we won't get the whole thing. And the only way to get the whole thing is to put it together as you know, something that can't be turned down. So,
Yeah, that's actually how we got the Prop 64 got changed up, some for good and some for bad, because what they did, we had it. I thought it was going to be pretty sacrosanct on a lot of these things because it took a supermajority to make changes. However, what happened was Governor Brown came in, cut a deal with these different groups to make a bill, and then he attached it to the budget bill, which also needed a supermajority. And so bingo, they just bypassed what I thought was going to be hearings. Anything that they wanted to make any worse, there would have to be hearings and this and that. You'd have a chance to fight it along the way, but no, they just like attached it to the budget and bingo, we had what we had.
yeah, yeah.
I don't think the situation is that bad here in California. I mean, I know it's not like it was when the collectives and all that wild growing was going on and so forth. But I really think that nationally they're starting to understand the value of this, and we're going to see things, really improving in the next few years here and everywhere. I just think the markets are opening up. The COVID, as you mentioned, some of the benefits of it is, like you said, getting together with people from a further distance via computer than we normally would have otherwise probably done. I think another one of it is the opportunity for us to, to come up with different approaches to things that we wouldn't have done otherwise. One of the things that I want to kind of pop into there is the pantheism, because as I mentioned, the legalization kind of put me out of business in terms of the expert witness gig that I've been using. But I had been interested in having a cannabis sacramental practice, and had been asked by attorneys to not to do that on account of all the court work I was doing. And so since with legalization, I had kind of thought that maybe there would be a drop off of interest in it, because the concept was you would have a First Amendment religious use defense. And if it's legal, you don't need a First Amendment religious use defense. So I thought maybe that'd be less interesting. But in fact of the matter is that we started having these get-togethers, and I
So,
find it's really a lot more interested than what I was expecting at this
yeah.
stage in the game.
So when you say canotheism, is that the right term?
Well, cantheism or canotheism, either. We
Can-
accept both of those.
So you're talking about the spiritual use of cannabis, and I know we've done
Specifically, the intentional and sacramental use of cannabis.
right. Exactly. That's a good way. I mean, yeah. So as you know, we've been in a number of conferences, and I talk about how it's tied into all of our different cultures, going back tens of thousands of years.
In
And
fact,
so,
I was just telling Mickey that one of the things that we do at our Cantheus get circles, actually what we call them, is that we have a presentation from somebody who talks about tries to bring a broader perspective. And I was telling her that we should have you do it one of these times. I really wanted to do
just,
that.
I'm ready. I've kept improving it too. I've
I
got
saw it. I've seen it a couple of times, so I have an idea. But
seen it. It gets a little bigger and better, and I brought in a lot of things I had been thinking about for a while. So I
uh-huh.
made improvements on it in the past couple of months, I think.
Oh, good. So let me talk to you about that, or let's get together and get Mickey involved in that, because she usually makes the plans. But I know I've always been very impressed with it. In fact, I've always been impressed with you. You've always been on the forefront of all these different issues. They have a very circumspect look at the way that the movement works and the plant works and things. So I have a lot of respect for you, Paul.
Well, thank you, Chris. I have a lot of respect for you too. I just let's talk about. I personally first smoked marijuana when I was at a babysitter's house in Dallas, Texas in 1972. And the babysitter's son was a Vietnam veteran. But uh, so, and I had heard from my friends at Cannabis. Well, how did you first get? And so I was a little early bloomer, but I was never in the closet or anything. You know, I was always very that this stuff's good and I like it. And it's a lot. And I tried alcohol and I didn't like it. So, um, how did you first come to use cannabis, if you don't mind me asking?
No, no problem at all. Actually, I had been in the seminary, and the seminary actually closed down that I was at, which was
Or what was the name of it? If you don't
it's
mind
a
me asking.
Maryknoll Junior Seminary. It was for Catholic Maryknoll priests. The
I
idea
see.
is I was going to go to Central America and preach liberation theology. That's what I thought I was going to be doing.
And what year was that?
That was in 67, 68, and part of 69.
Okay, so very early, before the Iran Contra and the whole.
Yeah, right. Before they
Right.
started killing the Maryknoll missionaries in South Central America, which is where I'm saying probably the fact that they closed that seminary probably saved my life, because I probably been one
Yeah,
of the
you
people.
could have been assassinated, right? They did assassinate a lot of people involved in that.
Yeah,
In the
specifically Maryknoll liberation theologists. Yeah, that was a targeted group.
I see. So
Yeah.
how did you find cannabis? Tell us about your. I get a lot of different people to tell this story from Ben Dronkers but
Yeah, well, mine is like I said, that I was in the seminary, and so I always had this spiritual pursuit of, wanting to be, experience the otherworldly, so to speak, which is why I was in the seminary, to make that connection. And so once they closed it down, my brother, who was in college, and I was like just in high school, I was a junior that year. I had already written essays about why marijuana should be legal, and written letters to the editor about why people shouldn't go to jail for marijuana. But by that point, as younger,
so academically, before you'd even used it, you were an advocate for legalization.
right? Yeah, and so, but I didn't. I didn't really think one way or the other about myself using it. You know what I mean? And then my brother says, well, what do you think? Would you, would you use marijuana if you had the chance? And I said, yeah, I never really thought of it. He says, well, I've got some. So I said, okay. It took me about 1/10 of a second to decide.
1970 or so?
69.
69, okay.
Summer of 69. It shows up in a lot of songs too.
It was a very seminal time for music and culture, that's for sure.
Right. And so we were listening to the Beatles. I mean, I remember what we were listening to, and and it took me 3 joints. By the end of the 3rd joint, I definitely felt it. And so, like I said, I felt like it was more of a profound change of perspective than I had gotten out of going to all those masses and church services for the past, my whole life up to that point. So it really opened up my eye to, what was possible in that regard. And like a lot of people, I just loved it right away. Another thing though that made me really like it was that I had a party house. My parents, we had a big piece of land, and so there was a shed in the back, and so we could have these parties without bothering people. And so when I was in high school, I threw a lot of parties, and they got bigger and bigger as time went by. And so I was observing the difference in the people who were drinking alcohol at the party and the people who were smoking pot at the party. And I thought, I would not want to foist the alcoholic behavior on anybody, because I found it rather unpleasant. And I had to deal with it all. The drunks would get in trouble, and then the cops would come, and I had to deal with the cops. And because my parents weren't going to, and it was my party, right? back in the 60s and 70s, that's just the way it was,
Right. Yeah, young people were considered a little more independent then, that's for sure, I think.
Right. Yeah. We had rules. You had to be home by the morning or something.
Right. So, how did you come to meet Jack Herer and become a cannabis activist?
Well, I was a general activist on all sorts of different things, primarily environmental and peace and social justice issues, and also local politics. And the other thing I was doing was a lot of publishing. I published several newspapers, underground, college newspapers, community newspapers, commercial newspapers. And so I was involved in all these different things like that. And it happened that in 1988,
Yeah. You're still publishing online now, The Leaf, which
theleafonline.com.
on paper, but now it's online.
Right. Yeah. And so we invite people to come and check that out. Thanks for bringing that up, Paul. I appreciate that. But so anyways, I had a very good network of political activists all around the country. I was working on a whole variety of different issues. And so in 1988, we had a pretty successful year at the polls. Federally, we lost, of course, the presidency, and we lost the governorship in California. But other than that, we really, most of the things that we were working on won. And so I was at a big victory party with all these different groups in a massive coalition. And so as is my wont, I said, let's smoke a joint. So we all went out and we're smoking a joint. And then I said, in the course of this going around the circle, I said, hey, look, you've been really effective political people here. Let's make a plan to how we can legalize marijuana. We should do something about it. That should be our cause. We should, we should just stop putting that on the back burner. Look at what's going on with Reagan, and Bush now. This is important for us to start addressing it. And everybody told me that was impossible. They scoffed at me. They said, what'll happen is, they said, you have a good reputation around the country with all these activist organizations. If you do this, then, that's all gone. And, you won't be taken seriously about anything anymore, et cetera. And so I just said, I don't like hearing that because I think we can do something about it. So then what I did was I took a review of what I saw as the various resources that were available, which weren't much. We had no money, but what we did have was all these activists all over the country.
Right? You lived in Los Angeles at that time.
That's right. But I had network all over the country. It was not the way we network now. It was, fax machines, telephones, postcards, photocopiers, and
basement, scissors, and glue. It wasn't a couple of keys on strokes of the keyboard.
Exactly. But actually I was good at, those were all things that I was really particularly good at. And also I was involved with marketing and advertising. And so I decided to combine these different things and use different strategies going forward, where I decided the number one strategy is divide and conquer. So I was looking for how do we divide it. So I decided to divide the issue into industrial hemp, medical marijuana, and adult use. And, you were already working on that kind of projects there in Oregon and so forth, but I wasn't aware of that at all. So I just kind of struck out on my own and decided that what I need to do is public relations campaign to have two different major organizations, one that would address the business interests of hemp and marijuana, the other one which was about the social drug issue of cannabis. So I had the Business Alliance for Commerce at Hemp and the Family Council on Drug Awareness. And then we had a campaign we called No Quarter, which was that we decided to go after each demographic group that I could identify an argument for, that we would target all of them. And the strategy was that no one would know who was behind it because it's an organization. And so people, whereas Jack Herer, everyone knows Jack Herer, the person, the author of the book. I didn't really want that. I wanted it to be like a national grassroots movement. And so I contacted the activists I knew all over. I explained to them, I drew a diagram of how we could achieve this, a map of the country, a strategy list, package of information, basic so I put it together a package and I sent it to all these activists all over the country. And so what happened basically was that they all kind of laughed at what I sent them, but almost to a person, they said, well, I know this friend who's like, I bet he's interested in this. I got it. It's okay for me to give it to him. Right. And so basically they gave it to the person that ended up being important for me, because that became the network. And then the other thing was that, when I was trying to get involved, I went to Normal, and for whatever reasons, although I know the people there now, and they're all, I don't know how it was, but for some reason I could not get much progress going with them. But because it had the national, the state organizations
Yeah,
and
at that time, the state organization was Dale Geringer involved with California Normal then?
he got, yeah, the same basic time, 88, he got involved there. Debbie Goldsberry formed Cannabis Action Network.
Yeah,
And they're about, MassCan got started. The guys who did the Hemp Fest were starting to do some stuff up there. It was just kind of this moment where everybody said it's time to do something. And so, like I said, so I had this package of information, and people all over the country who are, you know, they wouldn't say that they got the information from me. They'd say, I'm a representative of this organization, Business Alliance for Commerce and Hemp, or I'm a representative of the Family Council on Drug Awareness. And they would give them, but it was always the same message. And so all over the country, people just started following the same strategy, using the same message, and it was really effective, because what I would do then is that I would get feedback from them. Like, for example, in Virginia, it's like, well, where are we going in Virginia? Well, they were going to the county fairs and stuff like that. So, you know, we put our emphasis on farmers and so forth like that. In other areas, they would say, well, there's a university. So then we would provide information to get people writing term papers and things like that. If there's somewhere it's a paper mill, well, for heaven's sake, you know, we're going to write to those people. Or if there's an old textile mill. And of course, Gatewood Galbraith, when I ran into him, that was mind blowing too. You remember Gatewood?
Oh, of course. Yeah, I often quote Gatewood. In fact, I still carry on his most famous line. It's the biggest applause line for him, and is often for me too. The one of, I'll throw it out here: the petrochemical, pharmaceutical, military, industrial, transnational, corporate, elite, fascist sons of a bitch brought us marijuana prohibition, and it's a synthetic cycle versus the natural cycle, and cannabis represents the natural cycle. So the idea is that man called himself the most dangerous man in America, I think, in one book.
Well, you know, we wouldn't have a Mitch McConnell if there was not a Gatewood Galbraith, because he drove that state.
When Gatewood passed back in January of 2012, McConnell said a few nice words in his honor. And I went to Gatewood's funeral there in Lexington, Kentucky. In fact, I was just recently contacted by a researcher there who's doing a book. I put him in touch with Lynn Wilson there in Cincinnati and some other people that had worked with him as well.
Yeah, well, I hope you put him in touch with me too, because I've had a lot of fun. We did a lot of stuff together too.
Remember to pull that up. Of course, we have, you know, some of the old videos from Casper Leach in the LA show that you and Gatewood were on too.
Yeah, right.
And so, you know, we talked just briefly about the 90s. This is a national PBS show. It went out across the nation. So it was pretty groundbreaking at the time. How did that come about? How did you that was like you were starting the Business Alliance for Commerce and Hemp, and you'd already edited Jack's book. But this was like 1990, right?
Yeah, this was right after we released The Emperor that happened, because we were working on it. I think we sent the book to the printer in like March or something, and then it was this was before 420 was a thing, so I don't really know what the date was we did it, but it was in April we decided to. Well, there was. Let me just say this. You know, you have people like Ben Maisel, where he was doing his protest rallies around the country, and you had the guys down in Georgia who were doing that kind of thing, and I don't know who was running the hash bash and so forth, but there were a number of different demonstrations going on around the country, and my feeling was that we needed to have another approach. I said that doing protests is not the answer to our situation right now. We need to, you know, shape a message, and so we decided to do publicity stunts and press conferences, and to use it that way. And so one of the things we decided to do was to go in front of the Los Angeles federal building, outside the Los Angeles federal building, and plant hemp seed which was legal sterilized hemp seed, because at this point, of course, we'd found out about it. We had found the sources for it, and we're tracking it back to China. And I don't know if you were getting it from China at that point. You were involved in some hemp seed stuff, or?
No, not hemp seed itself. Hemp seed had already been imported by 6 different companies for the bird seed industry, and they never stopped importing it. And there was a couple of importers here on the West Coast whose job was to sterilize it upon landing. So it would be taken in under guard, and then it would be heated up to 150 degrees for a couple hours, and then sold to bird feed companies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so
I just primarily concentrated on fabric, fiber, and then primarily hemp after various events.
Well, this, like I said, so this was the hemp seed thing. So we decided to go to the court there, and and start sowing hemp seed on the ground. And so we were actually right across the street from the Los Angeles Times, and so they sent a photographer over, and again, we were in our tri-corner hats, and in fact, the main person in the photo was actually Floyd Landreth, I think.
Oh yeah, I remember Floyd. He lived here in Portland for the longest time, and he passed away from heart disease about 5 years ago or so.
I didn't know that. He's a very compassionate person.
Yeah,
But anyway,
a lot of hungry people on the streets in Southeast Portland.
yeah, bless his heart, man. But anyway, so he was he was in the foreground in the picture, and we got a phone call from the producer from PBS who said that they were doing this program, starting a new show called The 90s, because it was 1990, and she wanted to interview Johnny Marijuana Seed. And so, so I said, well, there's no single Johnny Marijuana Seed, but I was one of the Johnny Marijuana Seeds. And so she invited me to be on the program. And so what she kind of tricked me, though. And this is actually Paul Krasner's wife, right? His name is, I'm spacing on it right now.
Okay. Paul Krasner, the famous underground newspaper media pioneer, original Yippie back in the 60s with Abby Hoffman.
And comic and so forth. Yeah. And
years ago.
Ongoing political activist. Yeah. And so anyway, so it was his wife, and she's saying, well, she said basically she just wanted a shot of, planting hemp seed out by the highway. And or somewhere, I think we ended up at the highway at default, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
And so when she came over to my place, while I was getting the stuff together to go out by the roadway and sow the hemp seed, we just were talking about all these different things, and I was showing her, well, here's this and here's that and here's the other thing. And so then, she was saying, well, we'll decide what we're going to talk about later. Why don't you just show me some ideas? And so I just was going this and this and this and this. And then, of course, after we went out and planted the hemp seed on the roadside and came back to my office, I said, so when do you want to actually do this taping? And she said, I'm just going to use what we have.
Who knew, right?
Yeah.
I know they had Gravy on there, who's still active in protecting eyes with his SIVA Foundation.
Yeah, he's a great guy.
So you met your wife and became a kind of an activist team in activism, right? You met her at a rally or something.
Yeah, we met 7 years before this all started for me. That we met in '81 at a rally against Ronald Reagan in Los Angeles, and found out we had a lot of we liked doing same kind of activism and so forth, and hit it off right off the bat. And so took us 10 years to get married. We finally got married in 1991. And like in the meantime, I had gotten into the movement for the 3 years prior to that. She was in a band, and so we thought, well, actually, this plays into it as well, because she was in a band, and in '88 we wanted to leave the country and move to Europe. And so, actually, let's say before the election, we said if Bush wins, we might want to leave the country anyway. But we might want to we just kind of wanted to see more of the world. And so we decided to do that. And so we thought, well, it's going to take us some time to save up enough money to do that. So let's take 3 years. If the band succeeds, then we'll stay around. If the band doesn't succeed, we'll move to Europe. And so, so I said, well, what can I do? I want to do something different for the next 3 years. And that's the other reason I decided to pursue cannabis reform, because it's something I had never tried before. Reform, not cannabis.
I remember we had met just after you had edited Jack's book, I think, and then you were the moderator of a panel here in Portland at Lewis and Clark College. It was January 28th, 1990. I still have that brochure, which I got from Roger Christie. It was evidence in his court trial, I think. He came to that event as well. He got arrested for hemp seed, but he got out of that. But
yeah, I remember that conference. I actually met, strangely enough, I met Dr. Todd McRudia there, even though he lived here in California, but we met for the first time there.
Yeah, he had a separate panel. This was kind of a marijuana activist conference, but I think it was the first hemp panel at a college in an academic setting like that. There'd been rallies before that, but no, Jack Hare was on that panel. Lynn Osborne, as I recall, and me. I think there was one other person. But anyway.
Look at the list.
But now there are conferences every week all over the world.
You know, we actually got a really lot done in the first couple of years. Just between 88 and 91, when I moved over to Europe there, some of the different things were, like, of course, getting the Emperor published and so forth. But we also started, got the various hemp markets started to open up around and things like that. We organized like 89 different groups around the country, or not that organized from scratch. A lot of times I say they were people who were already activists or normal activists or something like that who were doing those kind of things. Galloper introduced the first modern industrial hemp bill that I know of, at least, in New York. They had an article about the business, lands, and commerce in hemp in the Wall Street Journal. We got this PBS program about it. We did that. I don't know how many people would remember this, but Jack and I did an interview on Pacifica Radio that was like a 6-hour program or something like that, and it took off all over the country and so forth. And so when we got over to Europe, the Dutch were asking the United Nations to withdraw cannabis from the Single Convention Treaty.
Finally happened just this year. We've had Michael Kravitz and a couple other people on a few times talking about that.
Yeah, Michael's a great guy.
Yeah. So tell us about when you went to Europe. We're down to, maybe 5 or 10 minutes left here. What you did there?
Well, like I said, our original thought was that we were just going to take a trip around the world, and we had saved up the money for the previous 3 years. So I came up with a 5-year plan, but at year 3, we decided, well, things are moving along really well. Like I said, we were getting legislation. We had the Judge Young ruling, all these different, things that looked like everything was moving along fine, dandy. So people were saying to me that we needed to get a different book besides the Emperor. So I decided I should write my own book. And we thought, well, that's not too big a deal. I just take the research with me, which turned out to be a really big deal because it was all paper. It was like carrying not a ream, but a box of paper. And a computer, which they were not laptops at that time. And we decided to take it with us and to go over there. And in the meantime, I had already encountered actually Jack had gone over there, and I got this phone call from him. He said, there's this museum in Amsterdam. It's a cannabis museum, and they don't have anything in there. I need you to send over some stuff. So I sent a bunch of stuff over to the Dronkers, Ben Dronkers, for the museum there. And then when Mickey and I decided it was time to take our trip. And so as soon as we got off, landed on the plane in Amsterdam, we knew we could not travel with that box of paper and computers. That was not going to be able to go around Europe with us the way we had thought. So we put it into storage, and then decided to take a look around the town, got our hotel room and stuff, and so wandered over to the museum and saw Alan, and he said, "Well, come on inside." So I went inside, and basically there was not very much in there. There was some pipes. There was a little grow box. There was our pages from The Emperor Wears No Clothes blown up into poster size, posted on the wall, and the different things that we had sent over there. And so, so then Ben came by, and so I'm an artist as well, fine artist, and so I had a pad with me, and I said to him, Ben, if this was my museum, here's what I would do. It's why I started sketching displays out in front, and then so he said, well, we need to talk about that more. So I said, well, I also need somewhere to leave this box full of computers and paper. So we left the stuff there, and the plan was to come back and do the museum, and so that's what happened. But Mickey and I moved to Spain. Had the book and the paper and computers shipped down. That's where I wrote Hemp Lifeline to the Future, the first draft. Then I thought we were ready to get the museum going, and so I moved up to Holland, and it turned out that they didn't really quite have it as ready as it sounded like it was going to be. And so I got to do the second draft of the book, and also to do the first run at putting together the museum there. But then we knew we had to come back another year. So then the plan was to come back the following year. And so I came back to the States, and then that's when we formed the Hemp Industries Association. We got the Colorado law introduced. We got the Canadian research hemp law passed. And I say we, I'm not saying that as me, but the movement did that.
Yeah.
And I had a little finger in all of these things, but it was a movement of people doing this. That's one of the things is, people say, who did what, and it's kind of hard to tell because there were so many people doing so many things. We had such great activists over the years, man. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's we're drawn to this. There's something about cannabis and the fact that it's criminalized that obviously is wrong. So let's just briefly talk about 64. I know the 64 campaign was particularly divisive. I know you suffered a lot of personal attacks in advocating for legalization, but I think it's been a real success. The revenue for cannabis sales all around the country, especially since the pandemic, has really ballooned. It's much larger than anyone thought it would be. After just a year of legalization in Illinois, it's already bringing in more money than alcohol taxes. How does that compare in California?
Well, I think that it's kind of comparable to alcohol taxes here in California, but that's not really reasonable because in the alcohol, they're selling a lot more alcohol, so we're so much more taxed that it adds up to the same amount. It's not because people are buying an equivalent amount of cannabis, which one might wish that would be what's going on. And I'm a little worried this idea of taxing by potency. I know one of the main things I don't like about it is Kevin Sabet is proposing it. He's a guy who opposed medical marijuana, opposed making a lower law enforcement priority, opposed every step along the way. He was one of the anti-Prop 215, anti-SB 420, anti every other initiative in the country. And he's just retrenching ground. And so that makes me immediately suspect of that. But let's go back to Prop 64. As far as the campaign is concerned, actually the Proposition 19 campaign, which was in 2010, where Richard Lee, who founded the Oaksterdam University, self-funded an initiative. And that was more divisive. I'm sorry?
I said, I know what that's like.
Yeah, you have some personal experience with that. But anyway, Richard Lee, when he put that campaign out, that's when we had our first encounters with the Stoners Against Legalization. And what that refers to is a group of people, one of whom included Dennis Perone, where they said, well, we're for legalization, but it has to be perfect legalization. And then they would find flaw, which, I didn't really mind that, people finding flaw. But the thing is, where there were no flaws, they would just make stuff up. And so that was the first time we had really had to deal with people just flat out who were supposed to be on our side, just flat out making up bullshit and then spreading rumors about us personally as well. So the campaign people told us at that time, they said, well, don't fight back because, what, you just ignore them. Nobody's going to pay attention to them. Well, at that point, the internet was going and Facebook was going, and you couldn't just ignore them. They'd create their own echo chamber. That's what we found out. And so so that really actually paid off for us in a certain way indirectly when it came to Prop 64, because we had already dealt with them once and know that you couldn't ignore them, that we had to have a response. And so when it came time for Prop 64, even though they were more skilled in their attacks at us, we were likewise prepared to handle their attacks in a way that, they were not expecting, especially because there was a certain point where they started boasting about how much they were lying about stuff and getting away with it, and then we just exposed that whole thing. So their own boasts turned out against them in that case.
Success is the best sort of outcome in that, and 64 has been a success. I want to thank you for coming on, Chris. Let's talk about your websites and how people can reach you. First of all, I know you're an expert witness for many people. If somebody is out there with a criminal case anywhere out there here in the United States, how can somebody reach you if they you have a website or any other contact information for that?
Well, the best way is definitely by email, case@chrisconrad.com. We have different. That's the best one, really. If anybody particularly have a legal issue, if you're interested in the website, the news site, people who want to send press releases or things like that, give an article, that would be info@westcoastleaf.com. info@westcoastleaf.com. West Coast Leaf was the name of the newspaper.
So what's
not the website
nowadays? Is it theleafonline.org or what is your
leafonline.com is the name of the website, but West Coast Leaf was the newspaper, so we still it's one of those things we should actually just change it, but I haven't gotten around to it yet.
It's on your chrisconrad.com site, or
yes. And then if people want to know more about cantheism and sacramental use of cannabis, that's cantheism.org. And we're going to try to get you to one of our circles and get a presentation from you in the not too distant future, Paul, because I think we could really benefit.
I've sat in kind of as a silent lurker there, but anytime you want, of course. And I look forward to seeing both of you. We'll have to have more of a show about cantheism and your work around that later on, maybe when Mickey, your wife, feels up to it.
Yeah,
any other or anything that you want to promote?
Well, I guess I would just have to say that if people should be supporting each other on making things go forward. I'm concerned about what's going on federally because of the fact that the Senate, the people who are running this thing in the Senate, the Judiciary Committee are not necessarily our favorite people. We've got some great allies in the Senate, but unfortunately, they're not the ones who are making some of the calls I think that are going to happen here. But I'm really optimistic for things going forward. And so I just hope everyone realizes that, there's no one perfect solution to this whole thing. It's going to be a matter of steps and trials and errors and setbacks and gains. And so as long as we keep making more gains, then we're winning. So keep up the faith. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you, and help restore hemp.